Welcome everyone to our Succeeding with Competition Winners webinar and Q&A. I just want to share first like some quick rules for the meeting. Please feel free to introduce yourself on the chat box. Tell us where you're coming from, or where are you based. Tell us a little bit about you, and please keep your microphone muted during the session. In the end, we will have, as I mentioned, a Q&A, so you will be able to either speak or you can write your questions on the chat box during the session, and we will address them at the end of the session. Just to let you know, this session will be recorded and shared with everyone after it ends. So with no further introduction, let me go. I want to introduce you to Priscilla James, one of our super incredible guest speakers. Priscilla has been for more than 3 years the program manager in the John F. Ball Center for Entrepreneurship and Free Enterprise, managing and developing the Baylor New Venture Competition. As a matter of fact, she joined Baylor just 2 days after graduating with her MBA. Priscilla enjoys networking with successful business leaders and connecting them with college entrepreneurs, helping them to make their dreams become reality. That's why there's no one better to run this program for the Baylor students. Thank you, Priscilla, for being in this webinar with us.
Great to be here.
Whitney, and correct me if I pronounce wrong your last name, Hischier.
Yeah, that's good.
Awesome. She is a lecturer in entrepreneurship and strategy at the Haas School of Business in UC Berkeley. She also serves as faculty for the National Science Foundation's I-Corps program. For her working experience, Whitney understands the relevance of learning practical business skills while a student. That's why she has created experiential courses for undergrads and MBAs to either work with the startups on projects or launch students' own startups. Whitney has an MBA from UC Berkeley, a BA from Stanford, and is working on a master's at the Dick School of Veterinary Medicine in the University of Edinburgh. Thank you, Whitney, again for being part of this webinar.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
And finally, our host, Torsten Kolind, who is the co-founder and CEO of YouNoodle, a SaaS platform that specializes in startup sourcing and selection, helping foundations, universities, brands, and governments to generate impact through entrepreneurship. He has judged startup programs at Stanford University, the MIT, and Imperial College London. Torsten is an advisor to a number of startups and an investor in some venture funds. So thank you very much, and I will give the microphone to Torsten.
Amazing, thank you, and welcome everybody. I think first of all, thanks for the introduction. I definitely think this will be a very simple, light-hearted conversation more than a webinar. So let's make it that. I think we have a group of about 20 people or so here, so definitely not that many. So if you have any questions or anything else along the way, you are more than welcome to post a question or raise your hand, and we'll make sure we get there. We will leave some time at the end for questions, but definitely let's make it participatory. And also, I can see a few people are already in the chat, kind of posting your where you're from or what you do, and definitely feel free to do that. This is certainly also for all of you guys to be able to connect and share notes afterwards. So that's really cool. And I think I should probably also mention that yes, YouNoodle is a company, but it started very much as a project that came out of the university world. I was working in my native Denmark, running something called Venture Cup, which was, and I guess is, a competition and a program, an educational program for students across the Danish universities. And I was kind of sitting in Denmark somewhat, confounded about, well, how do we actually do this? There aren't anybody else, or weren't at the time anybody else I could go and talk to learn how to make this program better than it was that day. So I went to a conference that MIT organized called the Global Startup Workshop, And I met Rebecca Wang, who was doing the same thing, but at Stanford for the BASIS Student Entrepreneurship Club at Stanford. And Rebecca and I ended up founding this company together. We founded it in San Francisco. I was there, a separate company for different reason, but we were really kind of just fascinated by all of the student entrepreneurship activity and how easier it was becoming for students to dabble in entrepreneurship and actually start companies while still in school. So we wanted to build a platform that allowed people to sort of come together, and that has now expanded into a little bit more of a, I guess, broader aim in terms of eliminating biases from selection processes in entrepreneurship, both in universities but also in other places. So as Inusa said, the platform is very much meant to run a very organized selection process and is used in a lot of places. So that's been really fun. And I think we have learned a lot from that process as well, even though I guess the company and platform today is a little different from what we set out to do. But I thought that was relevant context for why we're here. So I'm super happy to have both of you, Priscilla and Whitney, with us today. I think what we should do is to just kind of start off with each of you, maybe briefly letting the rest of us know what activities or programs each of you are working with within sort of university entrepreneurship, just so we have a little bit of background beyond the introduction. I don't know, perhaps Whitney, if you can go first.
Yeah, happy to. So as was mentioned in the intro, I teach in entrepreneurship and strategy. So sort of two different camps within UC Berkeley. And increasingly, I'm being asked to bring the entrepreneurship courses outside the business school in places like engineering, public policy, where it's not so much about a startup, but the mindset. And figuring out how to problem solve and create products and solutions that meet a market need versus the traditional university approach to commercializing research, which is create something super cool in a lab, work on it for your entire PhD, then go out and see if the world wants it. That kind of feeds into the other work I do with the National Science Foundation around commercializing mostly scientific academic research. And I like to call it therapy for scientists and technicians, because many have never talked to a potential customer. And a lot of times it's really shocking and horrible for them to hear that, the world doesn't want it, it's already been created, or they'll take it, but they don't want to pay for it. So I work in those areas. I also have done a bit of international work within entrepreneurship, doing case studies for the World Bank and primarily Central and Eastern Europe, and looking at networks and opportunities and things that haven't gone so well there. And then I do experiential courses. I like to call it try before you buy, or startups. It ain't all that. And I have courses for undergrads and MBAs where they go and work with a startup for a semester. And many of them come back and say, this is not for me. I want to be on payroll somewhere. It's too stressful. I watch what the entrepreneur goes through, and others realize they love it. So it's helpful in terms of, that first job post graduation and figuring out where might be a good fit. So that's a little bit about me. I'll hand over to Priscilla.
Amazing. I just want to comment on letting people figure out if it's for them or not. I think, yes, you're helping a lot of people figuring out for them, but we're actually also helping people figuring out that it's not for them. I think that's really important, to not let people that should not be entrepreneurs down the path of what is often risky and complicated and difficult in many ways. So I think that was a cool way of presenting that. Priscilla, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So once again, I'm really glad to be here. I mainly work on the Baylor New Venture competition, and we just started another initiative for alumni, celebrating the entrepreneurial successes of alumni. And so part of what I do is trying to connect several different puzzle pieces, individuals in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, to make sure that each person gets what they need. So in the sense of, for the collegiate students, we want to make sure that they have all the tools necessary for success, not just capital, not just cash. That's not what's going to make them successful. They need resources, they need mentors, coaches, and feedback. And so part of the competition for us is what makes it different is how much feedback we give them, how much mentorship we give them along the way, to make sure that whether they win that 50,000 prize or not, they are still considered successful. They're still considered winners because of the feedback that they've gotten from our investors or our potential investors. But accomplished entrepreneurs, executive leaders, bankers, lawyers, all these individuals who are familiar with the entrepreneurial ecosystem and can give these students tips, feedback, advice, wisdom to make sure that going forward, whether they make it through all the way to the top 10 or not, they are successful. So that's part of what I do.
That's awesome. And I think we hit the nail right on his head here in terms of today's topic, which of course is about, you know, how to make entrepreneurs succeed after these programs. But I guess I want to just maybe start with you, Priscilla, and ask you a question that's a little more fundamental, which is, given the fact that we are at these different universities, is the role really both learning and also succeeding for these entrepreneurs, or is it one or is it the other, or how are those two? How do you see the balance between learning and actually commercially succeeding with these projects?
Well, I was going to say, if you're learning, then you're succeeding.
Great.
That's it.
Good answer.
But succeeding in their ventures, I just have to repeat, if you're learning, then you're succeeding, because then you're going to, for that cliche, fail fast and move on to the next step and get on. Let every moment, everything that you go through be a stepping stone to where you eventually need to be. So every experience can be a learning aspect. And so even for us, it's not just about the cash. Are you learning? Are you building confidence? Because that's part of what we need to do. We want to encourage these entrepreneurs to be bold, learn, be confident in what you know and know what you don't know, and be open to learning about what you don't know.
I love it. And thereby we also already have sort of different definitions of success here, right? Where, you know, of course, for most entrepreneurs, not just those out of university, you're rarely successful with your first startup anyway. I mean, this is a journey. It is something that often means you're doing multiple things. And so in that sense, you are also, what I'm hearing you say here is that it's not really about whether they actually succeed with the projects that they go through the competition with. It's really about learning and you know, ideally something comes out of it, but it's a secondary, I guess, aim, right?
Yes, it's secondary, but at the same time, we do want them to be successful with what they're working on. So we do the best we can with going forward and helping them be successful. And many of them have, but learning, confidence, encouragement, those are top level.
Absolutely, I hear you. So maybe let's come back to that. Whitney, do you have an opinion on that? You know, the learning versus commercial success?
Absolutely. I mean, this is the challenge when you're teaching a course around this. Like, I have 2 classes where I have students working on starting companies or coming up with a concept, and then, you know, in the weird artificial confines of a semester-long course, trying to take that as far as they can to make a go, no-go decision. And the, you know, the evil word for all of them is pivot. And we always use this lean launch method of, like, we want them to try to get to 100 interviews at least in the semester, and they get partway through and they're like, this is going nowhere, or we've lost interest in to do something else, but they're really stuck because they feel like they have to start over from scratch. And, you know, this is tied to a class and they're worried about grades. So the point is, it's tough to teach this within a semester-long class because it just doesn't fit the way a normal academic kind of process works. And I think, as you know, kind of echoing Priscilla, I sort of emphasize the goal is not to get you to a certain point and then, you know, that means achievement. It's this, you know, being able to hear the no's, being able to say, wow, like, we need to pivot, being able to say, you know what, we're going to just finish this up in the semester, but this is not for us because we realize we're really not passionate about, you know, fill in the blank, makeup kits that you can, you know, put together at home. I've seen so many different things over the years. But the key thing that I always say, there's one skill set I hope they take away from this, which is primary research through interviews, the ability to go out and ask questions, the ability to go out and figure out who to talk to and how to build relationships, because that networking is always the first step, ultimately, to a sale. But if you go out at trying to sell something to someone, they're going to put up the hand. If you go out saying, hey, I'd love to hear your challenges you're dealing with in your job or your daily life. Wow, that's free therapy. People love it. And if you can build that skill, you can bring it into any job to be successful, even if you're working in a big company, in government, in a nonprofit. So that's my metric for success.
I think that's so true. And I think if I remember correctly, you called it right here before, you called it therapy for scientists. This idea that you need to actually get out of your comfort zone. And I think that's absolutely also what I observed. And in fact, I think I need it myself as well. I'm an engineer by training, and I definitely did not like the whole, customer development and sales part of, I liked inventing things, it's like, wow, this thing can do something amazing. And I just kind of assumed that the rest of the world would see it that way. And I think I agree with you. It's a really, really important skill that's, I guess, can be hard to teach in a course, right? You have to have something experiential, as you said, or some sort of actual project that they work on.
Yeah, absolutely. And whether they're working on a project for a startup or their own startup, the good part about doing this through a class or a program is it's a forcing function. When you say you have to do a certain number of interviews, even if they're deeply introverted, don't want to do it, it's really uncomfortable, but it's muscle memory. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. And once you start realizing how much really cool, amazing, interesting things you can learn through it, I think it becomes almost like addictive in a way, or what we're hoping is you just take this forward in anything that you're working on.
For sure. Priscilla, I think you were sort of halfway through mentioning a number of things that you do as part of the program to make sure that your students and participants succeed, that it's so much more than just going through a competition. That might be a good thing to actually just, if you wouldn't mind, just go through some of those tools and resources that you use outside of the competition itself.
Okay, great. So I'd like to start with what we do through the competition and then wrap up with outside the competition.
Great, please.
And so when the teams apply, we continuously give them feedback on their submissions, their executive summary, their business plan, et cetera, because multiple individuals in the industry look at those documents and give feedback. And so then for those top 10 teams, we pair them with a mentor as close to their industry as possible, so that they're not just successful for the competition, but for the lifetime of their business. And once again, use that magic word, learn. And so then part of in addition to the mentor we pair them with, we also give them pitch coaching, because as we just mentioned, perhaps they're really great on putting their information on paper, but we need to make sure that they know how to pitch this to potential investors, but also potential customers or customers that they may already have, so that they can present their value proposition appropriately, especially if they have a certain frame of mind. Torsten, you mentioned you're an engineer, but you want to be able to make sure that everyone sees the value. Well, we want to make sure that we can get those students to present that properly. We also give in-kind awards. And so that can be in the sense of co-working space, IBM, AWS credits, consultation, marketing, also legal consultation and financing, because once again, maybe these students have learned several different things in their classrooms, or they've been in the weeds with their ventures, but we want to be able to pair those with, how do you finance your venture after the competition? How do you market your venture? And so then we also give them opportunities to present to the Baylor Angel Network that we have here. And also we have a Startup Waco Award. So we have a part of our entrepreneurial system here in Waco. We connect with a accelerator. And so we connect these students, or the top 3 students, yes, to this accelerator to make sure that they get some even more in-depth networking. So outside of the competition, we have programs such as, we call it OSO Launch, and that's for freshmen, juniors, seniors, because freshmen, sophomore, juniors, because we're in our 3rd year, to help students who have already started a company in high school, or they want to start a company here in college, and give them peer mentorship, pair them up with mentors once again, and have speakers, but make sure that they have those tools necessary to be successful. We also have the can't think of the word now, a podcast for entrepreneurship, just bringing in different speakers. It's not just students, but individuals who have been successful. We also have Confessions of an Entrepreneur here in the department, where we bring entrepreneurs from in the community who have not followed the typical path, just to give students another perspective. So we have several different programs.
Amazing. I took a lot of notes. That's awesome. I wish when I was in college that there was access to such resources. I do think that has actually really changed over the past 10 years or so, 10, 15 years. There's like just so much more, both programs, but also depth of offerings, and I think willingness to volunteer as well for folks like mentors and others that are willing to volunteer their time. So I think that's really cool. Whitney, I think you're obviously more sort of in the course side, but it's not that dissimilar, because you do have students going through pretty much the same journey. It's just the constraints of it is a course rather than a competition. So anything you can add here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was just looking because I sit within the Berkeley kind of ecosystem, which is 40,000 students, 20,000 staff and faculty. So, and then the campus is ringed by, virtual or actual offices of investors looking for early stage investment. So there's definitely a somewhat chaotic, very organic network of people wanting to throw money at startups. And we have a page for entrepreneurship and innovation for the campus. And I looked, and there's no fewer than like 40 programs. So in our case, like there's just too much. There's a lot of noise. Frankly, there's a lot of bad money out there, like being thrown at startups that are just not really ever going to go anywhere. And I think the thing that I've seen that's a challenge is that you create an echo chamber in university, right? Especially in a programmatic perspective where you're coddled, you're given support, you go through, and there's a lot of good stuff and you have to be launched into the real world, where especially in Silicon Valley here, it's the Olympics of startups. And it's a harsh sort of shift from all the support and academics and maybe early stage investors saying, go, 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 to getting in front of, a larger VC that's like, I've seen 20 of these in the last week. Like, tell me why you're different, and people can't. The other sort of analogous thing I've seen is, say, places in Europe, like I went my work in Poland and Hungary, where someone can create a very successful startup within their own country or region, but making that next leap to pan-European or global is really a struggle. And the one thing I saw as the distinction is having a contact, having spent time in another part of the world, so you have that network of people that you can pull on to make introductions. And that, I think, is true for the students too. So if they spend their time simply inside the Berkeley ecosystem, the whole 4 years or 2 years, it's tough. If they actively spend their time outside of class, networking, going to competitions where there are outside investors, and not just going to those, but following up and building relationships, it makes a big difference in their ability to be successful post like university.
Well, I think that's a very good point. And I think this question about, I guess the level of innovation is kind of what you're getting at a little bit here. If you can succeed in your own very local market, and you are going to have a hard time outside because there's so much else, is definitely, I think, something that I would love to hear if you have any opinions on, because I remember from my own sort of organizing days that it's actually very hard to do a coherent program when you have such different levels. You have people that have like something absolutely phenomenal out of a biotech lab or medical lab that's just like groundbreaking, patented, but super early, and will need a lot of time and money and effort and probably luck before it really hits the market. And you have some other folks that are in the other end of the scale, and they're just like, well, this is ready tomorrow. It might not be so innovative, but we can roll this out. How like, do you vary the I want to say curriculum based on what people are working on, either of you?
Yeah, we do. I mean, increasingly so. Like, I work as a pitch coach for some of the green building entrepreneurs at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and it just is not appropriate to stick them all in the same course curriculum because of that exactly. And especially the pitch, right? It's one thing to pitch an idea, it's another to pitch something that looks more like a finished product or service. So increasingly, we try to parse out people based on where they are in the life cycle. And the tough one is with scientific products where the development time is long, maybe because it's highly regulated, especially usually pharma biologics or med device is its own category because you're looking at up to a decade, and it just doesn't fit into somebody that's doing software for like a B2C type app. So yeah, I think we try to get a little more sophisticated by industry and then kind of where people are at in the life cycle. But yeah, Priscilla, I'd love to hear what you guys are doing for that.
Great. So it depends. So for example, for the students that we have in our incubator, well, they meet with the director one-on-one every so often. So they get the specific specific help that they need based on their industry, based on where they are and milestones that they've already hit. Also with our community entrepreneurship program, where we pair with churches and entrepreneurs in the community, many of them have already started their company and perhaps they've already been successful, but they just want to get to that next level. Well, they meet all together and they go through a couple of other steps. And so most of them have been successful. I want to say about 2 of them are just at ground level, but it doesn't hurt for them to learn that higher level information. So it just depends on the setting.
Yeah, I think that sort of entrepreneur to entrepreneur learning is also really useful. So that's actually a good point, even if there are different points of the journey. Super useful. And I think I have a follow-up question for you, Priscilla, which is, when you kind of, we have our different definitions of success, right? But when you think about how the program is funded and how, the future of the program is, are there metrics that you can share or certain ways that you measure impact and success by this program that others understand?
Great question. All right, so we do measure success on a couple of different levels. So in the first place, for the competition, we are rating them on quality of the idea, viability, marketability, viability and scalability, market attractiveness, and investor potential. So we do follow up with many of our past finalists, and later on I'll post a video, and we just celebrated 10 years. And so many of them are sharing how they share how they have been successful. Many of them already have their product out in the market or they have raised several other rounds of funding or buy lab space, buying another company, exited. So we've had the wide variety of what success has looked like for many of these companies. So that in the sense of, is it worth continuing the competition? Well, we have these success stories of the students going forward and being commercially successful.
I think that's really cool. That's amazing. Whitney, this might not be that relevant for you since it's mostly course related, but please, if you have anything to share.
Yeah, no, happy to. I think I can share because I teach in a few of the National Science Foundation commercialization programs. And theirs is actually not what you'd expect. Like they actually look at the number of no-goes, and they like that because it saves the taxpayer dollar, right? It saves people's time. So they're actually looking for the counter sometimes, which is like you get to a certain point and that group says, there actually isn't an opportunity for this, or, we're going to just do the casual, license it, keep our academic day jobs. And, we've realized that this is sort of the easy path. Years ago, my husband and I both worked for Endeavor, right in its early days. And I think they're one of the better organizations on tracking metrics. Obviously, they're global, but really what they're looking at is from an economic development perspective. So it's about number of jobs. And you can look at flow of investment too. I think that is a good metric, but it's also a deceptive one, just knowing that sometimes bad money is thrown into places that it shouldn't. But definitely on the job creation side, that is something to look at.
Yeah, and I think that's also what I was getting at with these different definitions of success, right? Because I remember, at one of those MIT conferences that MIT was sort of touting their amazing record of having created, this many billions of dollars in investments and exits. And I think, they were sort of making it as an argument for, well, our entrepreneurship programs must be amazing. And I was like, well, they might be, but that doesn't really tell me anything. You are MIT, obviously, like you're going to have a lot of commercial success. And I think that's what I was getting at in this, are we really looking at that? Or are we actually more interested in other types of success, notably, obviously, learning? So I think that's a very good point for sure. So we're about a little past the first half hour here. So I think already now I'd love to open up the floor for any questions that you guys might have. I have a few more on my end, but definitely feel free to either use the hand in Zoom or type it in the chat, or just speak up. There are not that many of us.
And Torsten, I'll just add one other area that people may want to be, address, or I think is important, which is the tech transfer office inside universities. And I think it's a real variety in terms of how innovative these offices are. Some are purely bureaucratic, processing paperwork, and in fact, informing most investors in large companies why they don't want to work with the university. It's a real turnoff. And then others can be incredibly innovative and almost serve as this arm for entrepreneurs to connect them, whether it's for interviews, for customers, or outside investment. So it's just a key piece, especially for those that are in a patented space. And I realize that's not everyone, but something that is common with like scientific commercialization. And I'll just add like a vignette of one of the more amusing ones I've seen. I was visiting a university in Warsaw, and the tech transfer office, and I'm not kidding, was sitting next to the Office of Paleontology. So, I mean, talk about ironic. There was a glass case full of dinosaur bones, and then an arrow saying Office of Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And you think, okay, that's not lost on most people coming in here to try to break into something new.
That's a nice one for sure. And I think technology transfer offices and that process in general might be, subject for its own hour-long conversation, because I think that's definitely something that is both a massive possible enabler, but in probably more times than not a limitation of what gets commercialized. And it's generally speaking, especially when you're talking about scientists, they dread those conversations with the lawyers, like, oh no, I invented something that we might have to go on patent, and it'll take time away from my publishing, and do I really have to talk to them? It's really interesting how just that cultural chasm, I guess, is I think really limiting a lot of stuff. So is there a way to handle that through programs? Are you involving them, any of you? Do they get a percent? Is there a special track? Any thoughts on how to handle that?
Yeah, I think it depends how deep-seated the organization is inside universities. I know with Berkeley, like my former boss, the former dean of the business school, is now the head of a new role called Chief of Innovation, that's supposed to work directly with the Office of Tech Transfer and the head of research to kind of transform that. Other parts of the world, because I see we have a few international people here, that's actually something like that needs to be dealt with. When I was doing some of this work in Romania, the academics looked at me like, you're crazy to think I'll go out and commercialize this, because under like the Ceausescu regime, we would have been imprisoned for stealing university IP. So there have to be clear laws about ownership and the relationship between individuals and the university and the state. And that's not really an issue in the US, but it's definitely relevant in other parts of the world.
It definitely is. Priscilla, anything to add, or should we go to the first question? I think, yeah, let's I think Juan Giraldo raised his hand. Let's hear from him.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Juan Giraldo, Spark Program Director from Brandeis University. This might be a question for you, Whitney. You mentioned you try to tailor the curriculum depending on the industry or life cycle stage of the companies. Can you expand a little more on how do you do that? Do you break them in different groups? Is different classrooms, different curriculum, or what is it?
Yeah, so it depends. Like if it's for degree students, then it's pretty easy, because you can say like in this course, it's a lean launch course. So you come in with an idea and will help you take it to the point of determining if there's a market need. There's no expectation you're taking it to prototype or to fundraising. When it comes to more customized groups, because in normal times, we have a lot of different students from around the world coming to Berkeley for a semester or a few weeks to work on a startup idea. And in that case, we have to filter it to say you need to be at this point before you come here, or we might tailor it to all of these folks are interested in IoT, or all of them are interested in agribusiness tech. And that helps because when it's specific to an industry, we can also bring in experts to give them feedback. And then when it's specific to life cycle stage, we don't confuse things. Look, this happens, it's just natural. I was recently running a program for a group of academic fellows that have been given grants to commercialize their research. And they mixed in people that really were at the point where they wanted to fundraise with those that were just figuring out product market fit. And so we quickly were like, the content's not the same. We're wasting people's time that are already at fundraising. We need to divide this into two. But I think a lot of it just involves pre-filtering.
Awesome. Any other questions from anybody? So I think I have a question that really could be for either of you, but do you have anything when we think about, how do we get these startups and students to be successful, and whatever definition is the right definition? Do you have any particular initiatives where you feel like this year is just working really, really well? Like, it's something that I'm surprised how it's like a magic bullet. And I know it's deliberately a difficult question, right? But I think a lot of people here would love to learn some new tactics if you have something you feel like works really well.
I'll jump in with one. So, a lot of times when we teach these programs, we're all about searching for the customer. And one of the big mistakes I see with students would be like, well, there are how many billion people on the planet that own iPhones? So they're our entire customer base. So I've actually started teaching the counter, which is tell me who your customer is not, like who wouldn't be interested in you, but you also wouldn't be interested in them. Because I feel like the process is so overwhelming, especially for people that are on the younger side. And so it's that balance of optimism and kind of sort of ruthless scrutiny about focus. So that's one of the things that I've started doing. And then even later stage is sitting with entrepreneurs saying, who are you not going to take money from? Let's set up the criteria, because not all investors are equal. And you've got to understand the power shifts and dynamics, as well as each investor is a relationship to manage. So more is not necessarily better. So maybe just taking a little bit more critical eye and not assuming that everything is awesome all the time, which is a classic American entrepreneurial mindset. Yeah, Priscilla, I'd love to hear from you.
I was just learning from you. That was great. And it just reminded me, I like how you mentioned, who are you not going to take money from? It has to, as close as possible, it has to be a win-win situation, because each investor or potential investor is going to want different things. So I really like that you're teaching that. So on our side, I can't say that we're specifically teaching each of these items, because each conversation with each team is different. But I think it's many times, and I would receive an email and someone wants to know, can they compete with just themselves? Does it have to be a team? And I'm just thinking the website says a team. But the importance of that is perhaps one person has expertise in one area. Well, you need other people that have expertise that you don't have, so that you really can form an appropriate team and be successful in whatever sense that means. So that's one thing I would say. It's important to know that we can't go through life alone. We can't go through entrepreneurship alone. It doesn't mean you give your whole company, all your equity away to investors or to your team members, but knowing that it's important to get feedback. And I really like that Whitney emphasized networking. every opportunity is every experience is an opportunity to network with someone, because you never know who you'll meet, what you can get, but also what you can give as far as information, because I feel like it's stepping stones. Everyone can be a stepping stone to where you need to be, but also knowing that you can also be a stepping stone to where someone else needs to be.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
I think too, just building on your teams, traditionally, like the NSF has not included things about teams in their programs, and I see a lot of things fall apart because of team dynamics. And one of the things that I've been focusing on is bringing in like bias and groupthink, because how many startups do you see where somebody's like, this is my best friend from growing up, or we were all in the same club, fraternity, etc., or we're all engineers, and and I get it, like that's just human nature, like we like begets like, and yet the reality is you'll end up with massive blind spots, and ultimately you may be confronted by an investor that's like, so who's got the business background, or wow, like all of you have the exact same background, so what does that mean in terms of your decision-making process? So really pushing on these entrepreneurs to actually bring in people who aren't like themselves. And it's not just sort of the superficial, like gender, race, but age is a good one too, but also the fact that like you have different disciplinary backgrounds, and also that like one might be really type A, and then someone else is like, everything is, an opportunity. You need that. You need to butt heads. Otherwise, you can quickly go down a very wrong path. So I've been trying to spend more time on that aspect and really looking at team composition, but it's a tricky one. And one that oftentimes entrepreneurs are really resistant to change, because they're like, but we've got our team and we've got my buddy and we don't want to let in new people.
Definitely. And I think this is probably a good time to ask anybody else here that are listening in, if anyone has any amazing ideas to share, but those are definitely good ones. And it does remind me, Whitney, that one of the things that I've done in the past that I want to share, it's easier to do in person. You can do it over Zoom. It's easier to do in person, but it is to make the students or participants pitch each other's projects, but from a sort of salesperson's point of view. So essentially, not an investor pitch, but like, I am going to sell this to whoever the customer is. And you essentially just sort of randomize it, and you make little groups of three individuals. You send one person out the door, which is the customer, and then you let the entrepreneur explain to this like makeshift salesperson, what is it that I'm doing? And they have very limited, you cap it at 3 minutes or something. And then once that's done, you take the customer, so to speak, in the door, and now the entrepreneur has to stay quiet, and that's really important. So now the salesperson is selling this product that they were just explained, and of course it's a disaster. And I think that learning process you can do in a matter of 15 minutes. You have a great exchange that makes this sort of difference of opinions and different of backgrounds, I think, very evident. So definitely, it's also really fun. So definitely, I can recommend that model. Any other either questions or insights from the room? I think there's a little bit of sort of chat going on, and I think, again, I recommend for all of you to connect separately and engage separately. But Priscilla, either of you, any kind of final notes that you feel like we didn't get to, or otherwise I think we'll wrap it up really soon.
I think my final note would be in the sense of just life. Be open. Don't be closed-minded, because you never know what you'll learn. and I know I've been using that word often, but not just for yourself, but for others, because you never know what you might learn to be able to pass on to someone else, and perhaps they can pass it on to someone else. So we call it an ecosystem for a reason. And so I really say, always be open, and it's okay to have, what's the term I'm looking for? It's okay to get a negative perspective on something, because you never know if that can help you pivot. I'll use Whitney's word. So yeah, definitely be open.
I think that is a great one. Absolutely. And definitely something that's hard for entrepreneurs, you know, to really be willing to be challenged about the things they're working on. I think before I go to you, Whitney, Charmaine had a question, I think, or a note.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So basically, I'm also an entrepreneurship part of the faculty, but what I found is that you know I'm from South Africa, so what I'm actually doing currently, I'm also trying to collaborate with universities abroad, like in India, in Latin America, and when students are presenting either their ideas or their entire startup pitch, we sitting in as faculty, and we have an opportunity not only to judge the student presentations, but also to give valuable input, because obviously a perspective from South Africa is totally different to that of either India or Latin America, and for the developed world. So I found that quite useful.
That's a great one. I think very in line with what you, Whitney, said earlier about that sort of international perspective. I've definitely experienced that as well, and you know that too much of a local echo chamber will maybe give the belief that either something doesn't work or something works, and either can actually be really bad if it's wrong. Whitney, any closing arguments from your side?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just building on that, the perception of failure is a fascinating one because that's very culturally specific. And I think it's shifting in different parts of the world to become more accepting or accepted. But you still see it in places like India, where, you know, generally what I've seen is in a highly competitive or constrained environment, failure is not an option, right? And you know, the thing one of my South Korean students told me is, you know, there's no word for second chance in Korean, right? Like you meet the threshold, or if you don't succeed, it impacts everything, your ability to get married, your family's status in society. So I think just being aware of these other factors that, like, we so easily throw out, just pivot, fail fast. It's like, yeah, that is a very Amerocentric view because we have the luxury to think that way. So to be successful in other places, you just need to kind of put some kind of padding or insurance in place so that these aren't such extreme consequences for entrepreneurs that do fail or just don't even want to start the process, because the concern is this is not just a one-time thing, it'll impact their reputation for life. And again, it's hard, but I do see this changing socially, certainly more in Europe, starting to more in Latin America. But I agree, Charmaine, like that this is something that is, you know, the more we can internationalize the process, I think that helps build in some cushion for people.
I love it. Excellent. I think this has been really useful. We got around a lot of different topics and quite a bit outside, perhaps also just the topic of success after these programs. But hopefully this was useful to everybody. A lot of tips were shared, and I can see a lot of chatter happened as well. So I think, Eunice, with your permission, I think we should actually wrap it up here. We have, of course, a recording, and we'll make sure we share it so that you can also share it. But I just want to thank both Priscilla and Whitney for joining, and I'd say particularly Whitney for getting up at 7 a.m. on the West Coast. That's pretty good. For anybody else on the West Coast of the US, I salute you. That's impressive. And I think for everybody else who is joining, thank you so much for joining. And hopefully we can keep this conversation going. And we'll host more of these conversations as well from YouNoodle side around similar topics. And you will hear from us very soon. All right.
This was great. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Great to meet you all.
Likewise. Take care.